Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Forgetting her passport, the daughter-in-law quietly entered her mother-in-law's apartment. Hearing a recording on the tape recorder, she hurried to the notary. Alina checked the contents of the folder where she kept all of her pregnancy-related documents once again. Her mother-in-law had insisted she prepare an emergency mom-to-be suitcase. She always worried. "Alina, you onion sorrow of ours, you can't be so carefree. I know your condition isn't scary, that you're not hospitalized, there's no threat to the fetus, no looming verdict of miscarriage over you. But pregnancy can be so unpredictable. Ever since I gave birth to Vincente at the medical station at the train depot, I've always tried to be prepared in these matters." Privately, Alina called Maria dear aunt, but aloud, it was Aunt Maria, and she never aspired to be a second mother. She knew Alina loved her own parents boundlessly and rightly felt one could only have one true mother. She felt sorry that work forced the older generation in her daughter-in-law's family to travel often, supervising the pregnant daughter more and more over the phone. But she was here, nearby, wouldn't she look after the inexperienced youth? She raised Vincente herself without a husband, and well, she managed perfectly. And his complex character wasn't a fault. He was well respected at work and tenderly attentive at home. What more could one need? Thinking of her son, Maria sighed sadly. Not everything in their communication with Vincente was smooth. But those were their internal family secrets. His temperament nuances didn't affect outsiders. She too would keep quiet, everything has its time. Contrary to all stories about unfriendly relations between daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law, Aunt Maria and Alina lived soul to soul. And not just because they lived separately. The young couple had their own apartment. It was simply impossible to argue with Maria, there were no reasons for disagreement. Oh yes, Maria and Alina had just gone to open a bank account for Alina the other day. The mother-in-law didn't explain why it was so urgent, but insisted on the bank visit. Then she gathered all the documents into her bag, including Alina's passport, which the girl completely forgot about. Trouble. She would have to go to Vincente's mother's house to retrieve her main identification. The woman thought again that you really get dragged around the city in this summer heat while sorting out this maternity leave. How did it happen that she didn't check for all the documents at home? Aunt Maria was right about her. "Alina, you're always in the clouds. A dreamy woman is certainly full of mystery, but do come back to our sinful earth periodically. You're now married, soon to be a mother. You'll have to leave your fantasies in the past. You'll return to them when you're composing fairy tales for your child." If anyone thought Maria was a strict lady devoid of a healthy adventurous spirit and her own dreams, they would be sorely mistaken. Having gently reined in her daughter-in-law, Aunt Maria would take her favorite fallot off the stove. She'd set out honey, sour cream, a jar of homemade raspberry jam, pampering and cherishing her daughter-in-law in every way. She fussed over her like a hen over a foolish chick. How often can daughters-in-law boast such care from their mothers-in-law? And here everything was almost perfect. Alina grabbed the folder with documents, called a taxi, and headed to Aunt Maria's house. Now she would pick up her passport, drink coffee with her mother-in-law, and they would chat about this and that, woman to woman. Alina loved hearing Vincente's mother's tales of distant ancestors. Imagine, one of her husband's great-great-grandfathers started his career at the royal court as the chief gamekeeper. Hunting, without the skill of the person responsible for it, was a favorite pastime of the high-ranking nobility and would never have been successful without them. The chief gamekeeper, the so-called head of all other gamekeepers, bore great responsibility, not only to organize the exciting, adrenaline-driven process, but also to ensure its safety from all sides. Maria always lowered her voice when she recalled the most thrilling story, the pearl of their family chronicles, about how a Hernandez family member supposedly saved the king himself when his horse bolted during a hunt. Neither woman was well versed in hunting, but each time they were in awe as Aunt Maria repeated this family legend with great enthusiasm. Alina would look at her delicate wrists, stroke her mother-in-law's soft skin, and always conclude the same. There's something elegant and refined about you, aristocratic even, as they used to say in those days, blue blood. And she would hug Maria again, and they would laugh together. Alina herself was somewhat ethereal, airy, slim, and light. Vincente called her my little elf. A somewhat stern, serious man, he transformed in the presence of his wife. He carried her in his arms at every opportunity. Over a puddle so she wouldn't soil her pretty shoes in the mud, or to bed. He always found a reason. Their union was woven from contrasts, a strict pedant and a dreamy lady. The type, a fan of romance novels, all spontaneous and impulsive. The Iron Woodsman and the Princess, if one were to refer to fairy tale characters. But all these first impressions were deceptive. There was something common between the images of Vincente and Alina, but it was quite remote. The girl's mother was a true desperate dreamer. She channeled all her creative potential into her profession as an art historian. Her parents spent their lives traveling the world, leaving their daughter to nannies, giving her a good education, but their hearts remained with works of art. They were always consulting someone, preparing expert opinions, dealing with museums and private collectors. Their passion was akin to fanaticism. No, they loved their only daughter, but from a distance. Thus, Alina always felt not exactly lonely in the world of people, but a bit unanchored. Amidst the expensive gifts from her parents, elite educators, caring nannies, and then housemaids, she never had time to be bored. What weighed on her was something hidden, something secretive. She had no one to open her soul to. And who would understand the cravings of a girl who never lacked for anything? With Vincente, despite their apparent dissimilarity in everything, she found common ground right away. As soon as mutual friends introduced them at some theater premiere, he asked to escort her home, and so be it. He immediately scheduled a date for the next day. What was so revolutionary about that? She was 22, after all, it was about time she had a man. They didn't care about anything, not disturbed by differences in temperament and manners, nor external paradoxes. Alina was barely as tall as Vincente's chest, wore a size 5 shoe, and had a somewhat doll-like face, as if drawn by a kind wizard. Tall, broad-shouldered Vincente looked as though he was carved from rock. His features were rough, his eyes and mouth narrow. And yet, they got married after just a couple of months of sweet courtship. They moved into an apartment her parents had bought in advance in case she decided to marry. Now they were expecting a baby. Any layperson would say, in this family, everything is as it should be, as it is supposed to be, and they would be absolutely right. The girl was almost happy, even reconciled with her husband's most important rule, which he pompously called the precision, the politeness of kings. Vincente loved strict discipline in everything. Being late was likened to a crime of the century. Forgetfulness was considered a dreadful vice, and other minor deviations from the planned course of life were not tolerated. So, to avoid reproach and not provoke her husband's anger, Alina was upset when she did not see her passport among the documents. For such a grave error, she was sure to seriously catch it from Vincente. The oversight had to be urgently corrected. Alina prepared the keys to her mother-in-law's apartment in the taxi, in case she wasn't home. Maria often disappeared with a friend to the nearby park. She'd take nuts to feed the squirrels and a loaf of white bread for the pigeons. Alina knew Vincente would not approve of such mess with scattered crumbs. So, she never told her husband that they often went on these outings together. Her wise mother taught her that it was not worth revealing all her little female secrets to her husband. Every charming creature should retain some mystery that a man would want to tirelessly unravel. In reality, everything turned out just as Alina had anticipated. On this summer day, Aunt Maria clearly couldn't stay put. Opening the door, the daughter-in-law found only silence in the apartment. Alina took off her sandals in the corridor, happily walking barefoot along the cool corridor into the interior of the apartment. She would quickly find her passport, put the kettle on, and wait for the hostess. Had she asked the taxi driver to stop by the pastry shop for nothing? She and Maria both loved those little cream-filled pastries. A little sweetness always lifts a woman's mood. especially when there were no reasons to be upset on the horizon. On the living room table, Alina's attention was drawn to a strange parcel tied with a bright red ribbon. She was never overly curious, but a note on top of the package read, "For Alina." There was no doubt her mother-in-law had prepared some surprise for her. Alina sat down on the sofa and unwrapped the gift. At the base of the gift was a small box, and the first thing the girl saw inside was her passport. Next to it lay a portable recorder, quite a sophisticated model, capable of recording and playing back sound at a high quality. Alina, who worked at a local newspaper after graduating from university, had seen such recorders used by journalists. She knew a bit about how to operate these devices. What had Maria decided to tell her, and why had she chosen such an unexpected way to convey the information? She was about to find out. The recording on the recorder began with an indistinct hiss, but then Aunt Maria's voice broke through. "Alanaka, my dear, if you have found my box, then everything will be all right now. I wanted to warn you, Vincente, he's not who he seems to be. You, in your condition, are in danger. If something happens to me after you find this recording, don't be scared. Things have been heading towards trouble in my house for a long time. If I'm still alive, find a trusted notary with good references and follow my trail. In person, I will explain everything to you in more detail." To say that Alina was astonished would be an understatement. Her mind buzzed like a hive of bees. There must be some catch. Vincente is a wonderful husband. In his presence, she feels fully protected from all harm. What did Maria mean by saying he was not who he appears to be? And where had she gone today? Alina had been sitting in her apartment for an hour, with no sign of the hostess. After calming down a bit, the girl decided to investigate. First, she called all of her mother-in-law's friends. All unanimously stated that they had not spoken to Maria for a couple of days. Alina had gone to the bank with Maria 3 days ago. She only grabbed her passport today when she started to officially arrange her maternity leave at work. It turns out that she last spoke to Aunt Maria the day before yesterday, and then she was busy with household chores and didn't even call her mother-in-law yesterday. Vincente said nothing new about his mother. He was supposed to have delivered groceries to her yesterday, but he did not mention it in the evening. Alina was so caught up in a tearful melodrama on television that she didn't properly ask him. She remembers that he said before bed that the day had passed without incident, but no other memories were in her mind. Alina agonized over what to do, where to look for Maria, and whether something serious had happened to her or if she had just gone to a farther park. Not finding answers to her questions yet, the girl decided to wait a bit longer. She made herself comfortable on the sofa and fell asleep without realizing it. When she startled awake, the twilight was already thickening outside. At that very moment, her cell phone came to life. It was Vincente, who was already home and sternly puzzled about where she could have gone. He would not tolerate such a breach of family discipline if she did not explain immediately where she had been for so long. Alina remembered her mother-in-law's warning, happily chatted that she had stayed at a colleague's place, where she had gone to chat after work. A mundane reason. An experienced mother of 2 children didn't want to send a pregnant woman home in the exhausting heat. But the sun was setting now. Alina would quickly order a taxi and soon be home. Vincente was satisfied with the explanation. The girl at the crossroads gained an entire hour of respite. She still didn't know how to respond to her mother-in-law's message. Was she right that she needed to urgently leave her husband and seek refuge? Alina typed how to find a missing person into the search bar on her Aunt Maria's old computer. The list of main recommendations advised starting by calling all nearby hospitals and morgues. Reading the word morgue, the girl shuddered. She decided to start with medical facilities. And, miraculously, at the 3rd hospital she called, they responded that a patient named Maria Hernandez was in their intensive care unit. Her condition was moderate, with no life-threatening issues. Visiting was allowed during strictly regulated hours. Alina wanted to ask the receptionist more about what had happened to her mother-in-law, but the call was disconnected. The girl felt somewhat relieved. It was already late evening, and she wouldn't find a notary today. She decided it was best to head home quickly. Maybe Vincente knew what had happened to his mother. She would find out everything else at the hospital tomorrow. Surprisingly, Vincente was in great spirits. It seemed as if he had no idea anything had happened to Maria. Alina was puzzled. Was her husband a terrific actor, or was the recording on the dictaphone a mirage, and she had imagined it all? The warning from Aunt Maria hadn't existed. It was all a mistake, everything was as before. Yet, Alina kept grappling with the phrase, Vincente is not who he seems to be. Why had Maria kept silent about this before? Had changes in her husband occurred only recently? Their marriage had already gone too far. Their son would be born soon. Was he destined to be fatherless? Why? Alina felt like she was going mad with all these questions. Meanwhile, Vincente slept peacefully on the pillow next to her. Doubts crept back into her mind. A person can't rest so relaxed if he is burdened with sins. Or had she misinterpreted Maria's words? She fell into a deep sleep only towards morning, thus oversleeping everything. She only reached the hospital by noon, and even then, without a notary. The right person was found in her list of contacts. Alina had a very resourceful mother. Her faithful subjects included the head of a well-known local notary office. Nathan himself no longer made visits, but he had a qualified team of colleagues who could be entrusted with any sensitive assignment. The girl puzzled her mother, who had already made a couple of necessary calls. As a result, Alina was found by a woman who promised to accompany her to the hospital whenever needed. This task was accomplished brilliantly, but first, she would talk to Aunt Maria herself. Perhaps after this conversation, a notary might not even be necessary. It was quite cool in room 12 on the second floor of the hospital wing. The outdoor heat didn't penetrate here thanks to climate control systems. Alina already knew that her mother-in-law had been admitted with fractures to her arm, leg, and collarbone due to an accident, as the attending doctor described it. The patient herself remained silent for now. She nodded towards a neighbor whose daughter was fussing around her, indicating that they could talk later when they were alone. For now, their conversation was like catching up on the latest home news. Alina talked about how her maternity leave paperwork was going, politely asked if Vincente knew about his mother's unfortunate fall down the stairs. Maria silently nodded again. Vincente knows everything. Then she whispered barely audibly. He was the one who pushed me in the stairwell and left without even checking if I regained consciousness after I lost it from the pain. The neighbors called the ambulance, but Vincente was already gone. Alina couldn't believe her ears. It couldn't be true because such things just couldn't happen. Her educated, attentive, always exceedingly polite husband couldn't show such coldness and indifference. The idea that he could coldly push his own mother and leave was unthinkable. Something didn't add up. She felt cold and scared. In less than 3 months, their son would be born. Could his father really abandon him in trouble? Unthinkable. Absurd. Maria must be confused. It just couldn't be. Finally, after the daughter who had been bustling around her mother fed the neighbor in the room, glanced at Alina's huge belly, dressed her mother, and took her outside for a walk in the shady hospital grounds, as if sensing these two women needed at least a brief moment alone. As soon as the door closed behind them, Maria began to speak unevenly. Alanaka, did you manage to speak with the notary? There's no time to delay. I want to completely rewrite my will before Vincente finds me here, in the hospital. I thought he would change, that his deviations wouldn't go so far. But it's getting worse, and I want to stop his greedy schemes. Greedy? Alina mentally stumbled over the word. Her parents lived in far greater comfort. As far as she knew, Maria and Vincente didn't have much to divide. But her mother-in-law was very agitated, trying to convey the information to her daughter-in-law as quickly as possible, so she immediately started explaining what she meant by accusing her son of material interest. The story of our family gamekeeper's heroics had a sequel. His Majesty the King rewarded his savior with a monetary reward, a pouch filled with royal minted gold coins. The value of such gold is now astronomical. Along with the reward, the senior gamekeeper was given a certificate that he had earned these treasures honorably, not stolen them. That pouch and certificate have been through a lot over the years. But the family treasure was carefully preserved, secretly passed down from generation to generation. In harsh times, the family relic, the certificate, was lost. In truly desperate times, our ancestors bartered the coins for food to survive. Now, such an ancient story might seem more like legend. The ownership of the gold coins was always carefully hidden. The family gold reserve has diminished somewhat but was still substantial. My father told me about the coins just before his death, passing on the remnants of that royal gift. Alina listened, holding her breath. This mysterious history seemed more like a plot from a book or an adventure film than real life. She wasn't concerned about the value of the coins or how many were left. The legacy was shrouded in such a veil of mystery and seeming impossibility that she could hardly believe this was happening to her. She fell into her usual dreamy contemplation, but Maria quickly pulled her out of her world of fantasy. I was reckless to tell Vincente about the family treasure too soon, and it was as if he changed. The gold coins became his obsession. He doesn't want to wait for me to pass away to inherit them. He wants to have them at his disposal now, believes he has every right to them. If I don't agree to give them to him, he will, knowing the will is made out in his name, somehow hasten my departure from this life. Alina couldn't help it. It all sounded too incredible. Why do you think your son wants to get rid of you? Wouldn't it be better to give him these cursed coins so he would calm down? Maria shook her head in disagreement. Usually, these coins were passed to the heir when their current keeper was on their deathbed, became too weak, or lost their mental faculties. I already broke all traditions and paid instantly for it by telling Vincente about the family heirloom after he returned from the army. He came back too thin and tormented, whereas he had been robust before. I wanted to cheer him up, inspire, and motivate him for a successful civilian life. But the effect was the opposite. He became secretive as if he were developing some sort of strategy with various methods and tactics. I realized something was off with Vincente a bit later. Initially, I just tried to feed him well at home, spoil him with something especially tasty. After his demobilization, he enrolled in a distance learning institute and got a job. 6 months later, he met you. A couple of times, he brought up with me how foolish it was to just store ancient coins while living quite modestly. That it was stupid. We could start a business with them, organize some profitable venture, invest this fortune in real estate, see the world, but I couldn't give them to him, couldn't betray the ancestors' decree that had preserved this fortune for descendants. Our relationship unofficially became more strained, turned colder. He often treated me with indifference, reduced our interactions to a minimum. Then he tried to get rid of me for the first time. From a legal standpoint, it was impeccably covered. You two were still dating back then. My son was courting, as it used to be called. We went to my friend's country house as guests. You were meeting your parents, so Vincente and I were alone. 2 years ago, the summer was also hot. After the midday heat subsided, Vincente and I went to cool off at the pond. Neither of us was familiar with the body of water. I took a few steps, and it felt like I was being pulled in. He stood 10 meters from me and watched my struggle. He didn't think to swim over, help, or even reach out his hand. He just looked into my eyes silently, waiting to see if I had the strength to swim out. I panicked, started going under more frequently. He didn't move. But it wasn't my fate to perish there. Someone's steps rustled behind the weeping willow by the pond. Vincente immediately sprang into action, rushed to save me, pull me out. When people approached, he had already pulled me to the shore with the most innocent look. We both pretended nothing had happened at the pond. He rushed home right away, said he missed you. I stayed over for another day. Later, I kept thinking, maybe his slowness was accidental, unintentional. Could it have been my imagination? You can only imagine how much I don't want to think such things about my own son." After such a confession, Alina's mother-in-law fell silent. She wished she could go back a few days to a time when the thought that something was wrong with her husband was unimaginable. She asked Maria to continue her story. Maria agreed readily. After the incident at the pond, Vincente lay low for a while, and I was reassured. A mother's love is blind. In my mind, I had already found 1,000 excuses for Vincente. Maybe he was disoriented, maybe I panicked too much when I started to drown, maybe it was all in my imagination. Then another attempt followed by chance, and again God intervened. One of my friends distributes dietary supplements promising eternal life and impeccable health. Their company often pays her in these same miraculous products. She's tired of eternally bolstering her youth and health, and she passes some of her bounty to friends. So, I had 2 cherished jars with colorful labels in my kitchen. One time, I was cleaning the countertop and knocked a bottle to the floor. The lid wasn't on tight, and the pills scattered all over. It seemed a waste to throw away such a treasure. I picked up every single one and put them back in the package. In the process, after putting on my glasses, I took a close look at one of the bright red-yellow pills and then forgot about it. A week later, I caught a cold and sent Vincente to the pharmacy for medicine. He eagerly obliged, buying everything, bustling around me, so caring and affectionate. Along with antiviral drugs, tea with honey and lemon, he brought those miraculous pills to bed for a boost of energy. But I noticed they looked different. The ones I spilled were red-yellow, and these were yellow-brown. When Vincente went to work the next day, I checked the kitchen. Sure enough, in one container was my friend's gift as red-yellow pills, and in another, the pills were different in color and appearance. Who really remembers what their medicine looks like when taking it? I wouldn't have paid attention before, but this time I was wary. The next day, I put on a little act. I started complaining to Vincente about a strange malaise. It seemed to me that his eyes lit up with a satisfied gleam. He tried to reassure me, saying that everyone feels bad during a cold. He brought me the jar of pills, the ones he clearly swapped for others. "Mom, take these magic pills your friend brings. They're for youth and immunity, you'll feel better right away." I pretended to follow his advice, discreetly spitting out the pills, and pondered again. Was I hallucinating, delusional, fantasizing? Or was my beloved son trying to send me off to the other world discreetly? What was he trying to dose me with? A strong sedative? Something to muddle my mind, something slowly toxic with a delayed effect? I had to figure something out. I still didn't want to confront Vincente about my suspicions. I found another way out. That evening when Vincente reached for the missing pills, I gave him a hastily made-up story. I told him a friend had called, said that batch had been recalled, found to be potentially harmful, and it was better not to risk it. You should have seen how his face changed, Alina. It turned angry, impenetrable, but he said nothing aloud, continued to treat me until I got better. After that illness of mine, Vincente changed tactics. He warmed up to me superficially, started initiating long heart-to-heart talks about our family, our ancestors. For the first time, he inquired in detail about how it happened that he was born on the road, at a railway station. His keen interest in this topic seemed insincere to me. As he grew up, I always tried to tell him about my past, about his father who didn't want to know him, about how I gave him my surname in honor of our glorious forefathers. Now, he absorbed bits of information like a sponge, bewildered why we hadn't cashed in the gold coins earlier. We could have provided a decent life for at least one particular family, yet we kept them for unknown reasons. I reassured him again that all the remaining coins would undoubtedly be his, but suggested they stay in a bank vault for now. He could achieve plenty in life on his own. One day, Vincente was particularly inclined to be candid. I finally learned why he returned from the army looking so dejected. He clashed in personality with the warrant officer assigned to monitor and train the military unit he served in. The warrant officer, a recent military school graduate, was physically frail, not tall, skinny. He took an instant dislike to the big, burly soldier. He tested Vincente's resilience with a series of assignments, both warranted and unwarranted, often remarking, "Precision is the politeness of kings. I will teach you to love the motherland. You will remember your military service for a lifetime, rookie." Vincente was not accustomed to complaining. He endured the harassment in silence. The warrant officer who had taken a disliking to him never let up at the slightest breach of discipline. He worshipped order like a god. He would not listen to any excuses about Vincente being late to formation due to illness with a high fever. He would not let him go to the medical unit. He invented hundreds of reasons to keep him from meals, always under extremely important and seemingly valid pretexts. Service, on the other side of the country, far from family and friends, seemed like hard labor to Vincente. It seemed to him that any lapse in discipline would be punished again and again, that there was nowhere to hide from this regimented regime, that it would never end. Maria paused her story, asking for a doctor or nurse to be called. The stress had caused her fracture sites to ache severely again. She was still very weak, lacking the strength to continue talking. And the neighbor in the ward and her daughter had returned from their walk. Alina promised her Aunt Maria that she would come to the hospital with a notary the next morning. Reluctantly, Alina returned home to Vincente. Naturally, she kept silent about having been at the hospital. She did not ask her husband about his mother this time, as if she did not exist. She busied herself in the kitchen long enough for Vincente to fall asleep. All the while, she turned over fragments of her mother-in-law's story in her head, pondering how someone's behavior could fundamentally change a person. Or had the desire to quickly enrich himself always been hidden under a veneer of benign qualities in her husband and simply not manifested earlier? She no longer knew what to think. In the morning, she jumped up like a startled cat. She quickly prepared breakfast, saw her husband off, and hurried to the notary. They reached the hospital without incident, accompanied by a kind female notary specialist. Alina kept looking around nervously, afraid she might not make it or do something wrong. The document processing took quite some time. By their appointment, Nathan's assistant had somehow obtained the old wool of her new client. Maria tore it up into pieces right in front of everyone in the ward. She rushed, fearful of her son's unexpected appearance. By evening, Alina and Aunt Maria were in luck. The neighbor in the ward was taken home by relatives for the weekend. With her injuries, they could afford to do so. The two allies were left alone, and Maria continued her narrative. After the failed experiment with the pills, Vincente threw himself into preparing for the wedding with you. I took a breath. I hoped that love would distract him from his intention to enrich himself at the expense of the inheritance. This crazy idea was turning him into a monster, heedless of any barriers in achieving his goal. To this day, I have no fear of death. What's terrifying, painful, and insane is that he's ready to raise a hand against his own mother. Vincente didn't even think about the coins for a long time. I thought he had resigned himself, given up his schemes, but the respite was temporary. After he learned that you were expecting a child, he pressed me harder. He played on pity, lamenting that the child would grow up in a family with low income, complained that he hadn't finished his studies, so he wasn't working properly, relied on nobility in the context that he wouldn't accept handouts from wealthy parents-in-law. They travel peacefully across all continents, so they must not care about their daughter's fate. Interacting with Vincente again became unbearable for me. With you, he was one person, with me, completely different. And the day before yesterday, his anger reached its peak. He himself offered to buy groceries for me, appeared at the apartment in the evening, was on edge, threw a real tantrum with threats and promises that he would obtain those cursed gold coins at any cost. I pointed him to the door, and he sneered. Maybe you'll take your son by the scruff of his neck and throw him down the stairs next. Be careful, or I might do the same to you. I don't know, my girl, what made me confront Vincente in the stairwell. At that moment, I felt a burning desire to slap him, to hit him for the first time in my life, to make him come to his senses. Somehow, he anticipated my intention and made a feinting move when I reached out my hand, just slightly pushing me, almost playfully. Everything unfolded against me in that moment. I tumbled down the entire flight of stairs. The last thing I remember were his terrible eyes, full of malicious glee. Tell me, Alina, are the gold coins really worth all this? Alina was again perplexed, now having no doubts that Maria was telling the truth. Now her marriage to Vincente was unraveling at the seams. She suddenly recalled many things that had always made her wary about her husband. Skeptics would immediately want to ask, where were you looking before, darling? You married him for love, having met your one and only, and now you want to back out? Alina had indeed thought about this too. Moreover, her unborn child seemed to sense her involuntary agitation. Today he was especially restless, as if asking, what are we going to do now, Mom? Alina didn't have an answer to that question and didn't want to discuss her future with her unfortunate mother-in-law just yet. Maria subtly started the conversation herself, beginning with its practical aspects. Alina, while I'm lying here in the hospital, and this process, as the doctors have said, will be long, you'll need to take care of your own livelihood. I would never advise you to divorce Vincente. That's a decision you must make on your own. I will accept whatever you choose. If you stay together, I hope that my son won't harm you or your child. By rewriting the will, I've put you at risk. Of course, you won't have access to the coins until my death and the inheritance is settled, so I'm afraid your husband won't give you any peace. Let me tell you more, I've thought a lot about our family's stubbornness in keeping the royal grant. Times have changed. We come into this world naked and barefoot, and we leave in whatever they dress us. No one is destined to take anything with them to the afterlife. I would no longer object to spending that money on my grandson's future. But technically, I won't be able to access the bank vault anytime soon. I still have 2 surgeries ahead, then rehabilitation and recovery. One thing I know for sure, Vincente won't get a penny from me. I no longer want to see my son. He does not exist for me. This time the women parted with difficulty. Maria didn't want to be left alone, and Alina feared that once home, she might give herself away completely to Vincente, unable to hide her indignation and contempt for him. She clearly understood that the countdown to making a life-changing decision was not just days, but hours away. How to evict Vincente from the apartment? After all, the place belonged to her, Alina, and was registered in her name. Life experience with her husband suggested that he would not give up the square footage without a fight, and her parents were far away. There was no one to protect her. Vincente paced restlessly around the hospital where Maria, due to his blunder, had ended up, mentally berating himself. Clumsy fool, couldn't even push an old woman properly to break something more life-threatening. Your cruel warrant officer was right. You're a bumbler and a weakling, and precision is only the courtesy of true kings, not a weakling like you. He was tired of shifting from role to role, trying on the masks of a devoted son, a loving husband, a happy father-to-be. Alina was chosen as the ideal candidate to be the mother of his child. Fragile, dreamy, very lonely. How he had hoped, by marrying this dreamer, to work on getting her pregnant, to present his mother with a grandson or granddaughter as a trump card with the words, "Mom, you wouldn't object to the family gold being spent on your lineage, on your grandchildren, would you?" Vincente thought that kind, soulful mother Maria would not resist such a compelling argument. Everything crumbled, fell through. Alina and Maria clicked right away, bonded, and understood each other with half a word. He could never have imagined that the tales of eternal strife between daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law would turn out to be nonsense in their case. Vincente dreamed that Alina would become his zealous ally in the battle for the inheritance, but soon realized that his slightly mercenary wife was more likely to side with his mother. Vincente tried once more to implement his long-term strategy involving marriage and having a child when he found out that Alina was pregnant. For a while, he was exuberant, sure that the coins were nearly in his pocket. His naive wife wouldn't understand anything before he divorced her and found someone more suitable for his new wealth. But again, a miss. He hinted to his mother that it was now time to shell out, but she again refused. She kept making her signature fallot and offering them to her daughter-in-law. His advances received no attention. Naturally, Vincente did not consider ways to fight for the coins, such as physically eliminating his mother. He sat like a hungry wolf in the bushes, waiting for something to happen to her. And with the pond rescue, he indeed criminally delayed. Perhaps the heavens would take his mother, and he would become the legal heir to the family treasures. Those yellow-brown pills, biologically active supplements for athletes, they make their strength powerful, raise the adrenaline level. He knew his mother had a tendency for hypertension and secretly hoped her vessels wouldn't withstand the horse doses of a drug meant for young and active people. He was terribly disappointed when the hard-acquired pills ended up in the trash bin. After the staircase incident, he panicked. In his own building, where all the neighbors knew him from childhood, his action could seem too irrational. After pushing his mother, he aimlessly wandered around the city. He drank something in unfamiliar bars, wandered some unknown streets. As if mad, he peered into unfamiliar faces. His instinct then told him his mother would stay alive. If only someone could read his thoughts. He dreamed of her damaging her spine, becoming helpless, having to access the precious gold reserved for her treatment, and he would manage the wealth. It never occurred to Vincente that his thoughts were despicable. Lately, he had become consumed with anticipation of the resolution. Something inside him suggested that he would soon see the coins, warm them in his hands. He found his mother in the hospital the same way as Elena, but did not approach. He would wait for his wife at home, inadvertently find out what Maria had managed to tell her. Strangely, up to this minute, his wife had behaved like a steadfast partisan under interrogation. She gave no sign that she visited her mother-in-law, did not let on that she knew about what happened to her beloved Aunt Maria. Could it be that the woman living next to him was not as simple as he had always thought? At that moment, Elena was feeding her mother-in-law porridge from a spoon. At the same time, she indulged in sad thoughts. Today she had woken up with a firm resolve to talk to her husband, to announce that she was filing for divorce. Let him clear out of her territory. But later her combative spirit evaporated. She chickened out again. She thought about how to act. To draw all the fire to herself, so she wouldn't have to worry about Aunt Maria. Standing under the hospital windows, Vincente still could not bring himself to appear before his mother. Not the time. Now in the camp of the hypothetical enemy were two fighters, Elena and Maria. It was better to eliminate them in parts, more certainly. Now he would provoke Elena into a dialogue at home. He would deal with his mother later. The man had finally bitten the bait of profit. He left no way back for himself. The next day Maria was in a panic. Elena did not appear in the ward at the appointed time. Her phone was silent, only a plaintive voice on the line responded that the subscriber was temporarily unavailable. How could the poor woman know that her son had finally lost his mind, risking everything he had, his well-being, honor, conscience, mercy? Elena had been sitting in the living room for 6 hours, tightly bound to a chair with a strong rope. She desperately needed to use the bathroom. The baby in her womb was restlessly kicking in distress, and she was tormented by thirst. Her husband had tricked her, offering to have a serious talk. He said it was time for her to know about an old family secret. Elena was curious to hear his version of the events. Vincente started from afar, pacing around the chair she was tied to. She realized too late that he had expertly wrapped her in rope, binding her hands and feet. While distracting her with his declarations, he tried to be persuasive, appealing to her love and reason, but she had no intention of agreeing to Vincente's demands. He wanted her to make a will for the coins in his favor and, outrageously, to transfer the apartment to him. What was this madman thinking? Apparently, he had gone insane if he thought he could so easily achieve his goals. And then what? He hoped that Elena would stay silent, not go to the police, not expose her lawful husband, the father of her unborn child. It all seemed like a terrible nightmare to her. Elena glanced at the wall clock again. Another hour of her captivity crawled by, seeming like an eternity. She tried to shift her swollen, bound legs. She might look fragile, but she was patient. Elena was very worried that she couldn't contact her mother-in-law. Maybe her elder friend would guess that something was wrong. But what could she do? She herself lay helpless, with fractures constantly aching all over her body. Alina didn't know whether Maria would sound the alarm, whether she would want to tell everyone that Vincente, her son, was hunting for the gold coins. To reveal the truth would mean to expose the secret of the old lineage. Was Aunt Maria ready for such changes? And Vincente decided to take a walk. The tightly closed apartment was suffocating him. He had been a staunch opponent of air conditioners ever since he got a severe sore throat from one. Uttering aloud his favorite phrase, "Precision is the courtesy of kings," he surveyed everything around. Let Alina sit and think about her behavior. While he would go out for some fresh air, he knew how to wait. He would force them all to recognize that discipline stands at the forefront of all life's corners. He would make them all march to his drum. And only the gold coins could save him and all from this sentence. Only they could absolve his soul, provide all the luxuries, finally freeing him from the influence of discipline on his thoughts, actions, brains. He would prove to the world that he was all-powerful. The man locked the front door with all the locks, hid the spare keys, and went outside. At that moment, Alina managed to slightly loosen the rope on her right hand with her teeth. Vincente had been in a hurry, tying it not as firmly as the left. The victim of someone else's painful greed was stoically freeing herself millimeter by millimeter. Vincente would be quite surprised to see his genteel wife so determined and fierce. The woman was ready to tear up the earth for her suffering baby, and here were some ropes, not so strong after all. Just as long as her monster husband didn't return too soon, just as long as he didn't go to the hospital to his mother and cause her new harm. Maria decided. She pressed the call button for medical staff. Uncompromisingly declared, "I want to file a police report against my son to tell the truth about what really caused my fall down the stairs." The doctor initially thought the patient was delirious, thinking she got worse. She herself had claimed she slipped carelessly, that no one was nearby. But Maria irritably pushed his hand away, refused a sedative injection, asked, "Doctor, do you have children?" He nodded. "Then think about it. How easy would it be for you to admit that you raised an abnormal person, nurtured a moral monster? What I am about to do, I have suffered to decide. I would be immensely grateful if you helped me proceed with my police report." She wrote quickly, feverishly. She didn't reread or correct any mistakes that might have arisen, not wanting to second-guess herself. This step took incredible effort, but she was now certain of her decision. Vincente learned about the change in the beneficiary of her will and reached Elena, his daughter-in-law, and her unborn child in great danger. Maria recalled again how she gave birth to her son in a medical station in the middle of nowhere. Her father was a career military man assigned to the north of the country. Her mother went with him. The daughter stayed to study. Who and when would a good higher education hinder? Young, inexperienced, somewhat naive Maria was in love with her beau, as smitten as a kitten. The comparison was not hers, but that of the dormitory supervisor who always warned, "Maria, you're an honor student, always approached everything rationally. How did you fall for this notorious womanizer? I've caught him in the girls' rooms more times than I can count. And now you. He'll use you and discard you. It's obvious, he's a pretty boy with refined manners. Just snaps you girls up like seeds." Maria wouldn't listen. Yvonne was hers forever. He had chosen her among all. The supervisor was right. When he learned she was pregnant, he hissed through his teeth. "And you too. Didn't have the brains to protect yourself? There's not enough birth control to cover all you girls wanting it." Maria's idol sneered and left forever, slamming the door loudly. She never saw him again. He even moved to another dormitory, a new hunting ground for a Don Juan. The memory of her first bitter experience always appeared in Maria's thoughts the same way. The doorway, the indifferent back of her beloved man, tears running down her cheeks. She had just successfully completed another course at the institute and went to her parents in the north. They would take her in, not cast her out. By all calculations, there were still 2 weeks before the baby was due. But Vincente decided to be born earlier. She was seized with pain on the train. Without consulting anyone, Maria, along with all her belongings, got off at the nearest major station. She was lucky. The paramedic at the medical station was experienced. Had mastered a lot in medicine. Always lamented. "Why is your little one so insistent? He's making his own way into the world, almost without my help." Later, as Maria lay exhausted after giving birth, sideways on a cot, her little son grandly occupying all the remaining space, the same midwife predicted, "You'll be serving him for life now. He'll grow up stubborn. Will achieve his own at any cost to you. You can tell right away with such types." Well, Vincente was very calm, amiable as a boy, then just as genteel as a young man, until he went into the army, where everyone usually goes through a harsh but proper school of life. Her Vincente returned from service a different person, a morally shot-down pilot, a wounded hawk, whose spiritual losses she could never heal. Whose fault was it? What did she overlook? Where did she miss the fracture? Maria folded the statement 4 times and handed it to the doctor. She struggled to turn to her other side. Again, she thought about her daughter-in-law. A good girl her son had found. A bit old-fashioned in views, but more a virtue than a flaw. Not aggressive or pushy, that's a fact. As soon as she graduated from the philology department, she worked as an editor, but what a golden character she has. There lies the real treasure, not in the coins. Alina was frantically moving around the apartment, hastily gathering the essentials. Fortunately, her parents had recently sent her money for childbirth, everything necessary for her grandson. The amount was substantial, and it was too dangerous for her to stay here. She planned to rent a hotel room on the outskirts, lie low, but she would definitely get in touch with Maria to reassure her. She would survive, she would raise her son, she would manage. She was not alone. She had Mama Maria. For the first time, Alina referred to Maria as Mama to herself and wasn't surprised by it. After his frantic search around the city had failed to find Alina, Vincente was furious. That mad dreamer had gone to seek support from his mother. That was not going to happen. He was now headed to the hospital to deal with both of them. Taking a taxi, he arrived at the hospital within half an hour and immediately realized he was right. Just ahead of him on the pathway, his wife was wheeling a small suitcase. His eyes gleamed. What a clumsy eyesore she is with that huge belly. No, he must definitely find himself a more worthy woman. This plump frump is no match for him. Just finish up these affairs, and then off to the bar. At that moment, Maria's room was undergoing sanitation. She was transferred to a wheelchair and rolled out to the corridor by the window. Divine providence exists. Now, she witnessed an appalling scene. Her darling Alina was wheeling a suitcase down the alley, while the scoundrel Vincente was sneaking up behind her. From the second-floor window, even the trees didn't obscure her view of the unfolding events. The woman didn't hesitate for a second. She pulled a cell phone from her robe pocket, dialed emergency services, and explained the essentials, her identity, location, and reason for calling. She added that she had already filed a police report against her son that day and that her pregnant daughter-in-law was now in danger, requesting police intervention at the hospital. Vincente felt something akin to a predatory animal's thrill inside him. He followed his unsuspecting wife, squinting occasionally at the setting sun that still well lit the hospital grounds. His animal instincts were stronger than ever, so the police car driving into the courtyard seemed to signal him, "This is for you." For a moment, Vincente thought he saw his mother's face at the second-floor window. No, he must have been mistaken. Yet, something urged him to flee, and he broke into a run. He dashed past his astonished wife, entered the building, and up the numerous stairways to the attic door, then more stairs to the roof. A flimsy little lock did not stop him. As he heard footsteps behind, a voice called, "Stop, Hernandez. Come down slowly." How did they know he was Hernandez? His mother couldn't have betrayed him, couldn't have reported him. She loved him dearly, though they hadn't been on the same page recently. The command came again from behind. Hernandez, halt. Resistance is futile, you are under arrest. Ha, as if. He might be disciplined, but he was not in the army now. No one had the right to command him, to control him. Vincente was already running across the sloped roof. The old hospital wasn't very high, just 5 stories, and he wasn't afraid. He boldly went to the edge, looked down. He'd catch his breath and then make it to the neighboring roof. The buildings were very close, it would be easy. Vincente remembered the army. Company, turn right, to the mess hall march. Hernandez, you run another 5 laps. Execute. Just like now. Right turn, and a running lap. They wouldn't catch him. They wouldn't find him. Later, the officers would say that he fell on his own. They didn't even get close to him. And that would be the truth. An accident, carelessness on a slippery roof. Maria and Elena wouldn't be told about his death immediately. First, there would be a lengthy investigation into what happened and who was to blame. Vincente's injuries would prove fatal. The moral seems to be that he dug a hole for others but fell into it himself. But no one felt like teaching a lesson. A man had died. And that is always a tragedy. After some time, Elena gave birth to a healthy boy, and Aunt Maria, having completed all her surgeries, finally checked out of the hospital. Without prior agreement, they decided to live together. Maria sincerely hoped that Alenka would find her man and raise little Pedro. She was capable of much. Near the city, some large construction had recently started. Locals in the village claimed that a haven for lost souls was to be established there. They gossiped that some blue-blooded woman either found or spent family treasures on this noble cause. Her idea and sponsorship so pleased the district administration that she found followers and helpers. Previously, such facilities had never been opened, a new but clearly promising venture. Sometimes a trio appeared near the construction site. An elegant woman in a distinctly urban, beautiful outfit, a pleasant young woman with a constant smile on her face, and a 3-year-old boy, unusually serious yet as lively as all children his age. They strolled leisurely, talking to the builders, then got into a car and drove away. On the way home, Elena sometimes asked Mama Maria if she had understood her concept correctly, and Maria explained again her approach to combating enforced solitude. Alanaka, people's destinies unfold differently. I am an example. Not all families, even with honest paternal and maternal love, find understanding between generations. Elderly people often end up completely alone in their old age, and not everyone has the chance to meet a kindred soul like you are to me. We can't warm every deprived heart, but I am endlessly glad that our family wealth was used to create a haven for lost souls, where people can find peace, friendship, and understanding in the company of others like them, in dignified conditions, comfort, and coziness. Listening to Mama Maria's explanation for the 100th time, Elena warmly hugged her and promised, "We, Pedro and I, will be by your side for as long as you need us. It's not right when someone has no one in this world. Such injustice must always be corrected."
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.